Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Doctors Schuster and Oxley, The Power of Stories. And today we are joined by our good friend and long-term working colleague, Hetty Pye from Russell Reynolds fame, among other things. As I was preparing for this podcast today, Helmet, I thought Overton window. And you know why I thought Overton window? I thought, I think back to when I first started in the workplace about what we took as sort of conventional wisdom, the things that that people just assumed were part of the furniture of working. There was a case. I was thinking back to why I thought the Overton window thing is. In politics, they talk about Overton window in the context of what is socially acceptable today, and over time it changes gradually. The acceptance of different norms become society. They get merged into what society thinks is normal. And I think back to the most obvious aspects of that when I was first joining the workplace. There was this thing in the US that black athletes couldn't be quarterbacks in the US, and it was accepted. It was an accepted norm. And I always thought, well, how did that become the case? And how is that now something that we look at and go, that's just stupid? There was obviously the glass ceilings that women in particular hit on in the workplace, and there were certain professions that were off limits to certain genders, and they were somehow accepted as normal. And today we look at them and shake our heads and go, well, how is it that we believe those things to be true? There's a great quote from Abajani who says, democracy thrives on diversity, but conventional wisdom often thrives on conformity. And I think in a way that's what the Overton window is talking about, that there is the leading edge of our consciousness, and then there is the sort of bulk of where society seems to accept is the norm at any given point. So the question I suppose I was debating is, what are the things that we accept today? 30 years from now, we will look back and say, how on earth did we accept those things to be just normal and true? There's this, for example, there's this lingering unspoken idea that gay men can't play professional sports or manage a professional sports team, something to do with locker room culture that I don't see as why, but that appears to be a conventional wisdom. There's the generational judgment. On one end of the spectrum, there's those of us towards the back end of our careers who are not believed to be able to learn new tricks. And then there is the Gen Z judgment about their lack of resilience and ability to work to a particular schedule. Or in the corporate suite, there's this bias about what gravitas means and what it is to be a chairman or a CEO, why they have to. It's almost performative art, but they have to look and sound a particular way. So as we look back, or as we look forward, what are those things, Helmut, do you think that we might talk about in 2040, about 2026, and shake our heads and go, how on earth did we ever accept those things to be true?
David, that's actually a great question and great reflection. Thanks for the context. It felt a bit like going down back corporate memory lane. It also reminds me how long I've been in corporate life and how much I don't right now miss it, maybe a bit, to be honest. But no, I think there are many things, but I think there's one thing, David, which I feel is not going to change. I mean, yes, there are often norms followed by society. Yes, there are ideas programmed in our brains, in our heads. But I also believe, and I think that's very, very important, many of these things have been and will be in our own limiting beliefs that are often absurd, not grounded in any evidence. But, and I think that's really, really important, it becomes the defining feature, characteristic for so many people. And I think it's very difficult to change society. I think it will take many, many years to really impact society. But what we can do anytime, everyone, is challenge our own belief system, move our limiting boundaries. And I think that's exactly what our guest has been doing fiercely, unrelentlessly, and continuously. And with that, David, I would ask you to introduce our guest.
Yes, as a bridge, I was thinking to myself, what's the answer to this question? And the only thing I could come up with is those people in our lives who are prepared to ask the question, says who, right? It's this way, says who? And while I haven't worked with Hetty very closely, I know her by reputation. I believe that she sort of fits into that category of someone who's quite willing to say, well, says who? It's this way, says who. So for those of you who don't know Hetty, Hetty is a senior member of the Russell Reynolds team, a great advocate for female leadership and the co-founder of the RRA Artemis Project. And we welcome her and thank her for sharing her time with us today. So Hetty, welcome to the podcast. Now, Helmut has some cunning questions for you, which I think are going to stretch your put you through your paces here. So Helmut, over to you.
Well, thank you. I mean, firstly, welcome very much. In the spirit of transparency, I've known Hetty for a very long time. I couldn't remember quite how long, but it's definitely more than 20 years. There's one thing that, just don't disclose our age.
We'll just leave it at that.
We just leave it at that. But I think there's one thing we often talk about in corporate life about don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. And I think Hetty does neither. She just storms ahead. And I think that is actually a superpower. And that's why it's such a privilege having you. But I think I know you quite well, but I realize that some questions I don't really know about you. And so I'm going to ask you 4 questions. One is actually, what is your favorite book, or what is the book that really influenced your life, your thinking?
That's a tricky question. It's a bit like, what's your favorite song or what's your favorite movie? I could pick a plethora of ones because my tastes are varied and my influence is wide. So what I can't say is I read that and I felt like this, as in it changed my life. I can't say that either. I would say 2 clues for my personality, sort of bookends in a way of my personality, is the book I probably most enjoyed when I was a kid was Wuthering Heights. And I loved it for the drama. I was looking for Heathcliff. It also, I liked the fact there was the female quotient within it. And there was something in there around strong female and heroine in the story, but also a sort of a complex world. But to be honest, it was more the romance and the drama and the wildness of it that I really enjoyed. So that's more escapism, romanticism, being sentimental. And a little kind of dramatic, which I suspect when I read it when I was 15 or so, I was that girl for sure. But if I think the other end of the spectrum, one of my favorite other books is I actually then came across Norman Mailer, not that much later in my life, a very, very different author, of course. I can't say I've been able to read some of his unbelievably turgid volumes that are like this, but actually the shortest book he ever wrote and one of the shortest books I've ever read is The Fight. And that is a description of, now you're going to go, what the hell is she talking about? It is the rumble in the jungle. So it's the fight between Muhammad Ali and George Foreman in the jungle, as described in it was in Zaire. And the reason why I like it so much is because it's about 2 people, it's about psychology, it's about politics. I love sport. It's about contest and winning against the odds, which is exactly what Muhammad Ali did through the demonstration of superior management of his stakeholders, his intellect, his preparation, as well as his resilience and his preparedness to go to the extra mile to make it. But that probably surprises people, but it's a fabulous book. And everyone knows the answer. What I like the most about it is we all know what happened in that fight if you vaguely know what happened, if you vaguely have some cognition of it. So it's not about that the outcome is surprising, but the way the fight itself is only described in the last chapter, and it's thrilling.
Thanks. It doesn't really surprise me that you like the books. It also doesn't surprise me that you don't like really, 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 really big books. And they're the same. I never, it's to do with patience, I think. I think I never finished Ulysses. I simply could never finish Ulysses. And that's the second question I have. And this is really to do, I've known you for so many years and I've never dressed you badly. I think every time I see you, you're dressed so glamorously, so beautifully, so tastefully. So one question, never realized, who is actually your favorite designer, if you have one?
I've got probably a bit of an annoying, slightly book answer. Oh, that's a lovely question. Only last night I came home with I bought my husband a shirt at the airport, but then he was like, so what's that Chanel bag? And I'm like, oh yeah, well,
Okay.
And I was like, I just needed another pair of summer shoes. And he said, I think you've got a shopping addiction. So he's not going to be happy you've asked me this question, Helmut. I would say I do like glamour. I like old school glamour. So I would say as a style icon, I know it's not the question you asked, but the person I go, oh my God, you look amazing, was Grace Kelly, right? And Rear Window is one of my favorites because it's so little happens yet so much. And the acting, I think, is superior. And she looks insane in that film. And everything about her is like neatness, beauty, perfection. But so I would say a combination. I think I like some Chanel. I like then more every day I'll go for a bit of Tory Burch, but not all of it. Mixed in with some Marc Jacobs. Veronica Beard has come up my lead a ladder board these days, and then I'll mix it with a bit more high street, like a M&M or something like that. But
Hetty?
I'm a healthy
No, no.
Outnet and Net-a-Porter customer.
I mean, I find it really, really interesting that you came up with that. Yeah, the world of fashion is dominated by guys, men. Yeah, but you basically like Chanel, which is founded by a woman, run by a woman, former HR director of Unilever. Yeah, so
This is true.
basically, true to
Tory Birch is
yourself.
Tory
Love
Birch.
it. Yep, Tory is Tory. Right, right,
Subliminal
right.
choices for subconscious.
Yes, didn't surprise me either. So the last thing is really just one more question, really. And I'm not really sure if you're interested in football or soccer,
I
as the
love
Americans
football
say.
and all sport.
Who do you want to win the World Cup?
Well, there is only one answer to that question. I am.
Other than
Oh, well,
Well,
now
I'm
you're
half
putting
Norwegian.
qualification.
They have actually won some matches this time, which is remarkable. I was saying to a taxi driver only yesterday, I think if they get to the last 16, that is an incredible triumph. I think it's unusual and unexpected. They won't win the World Cup. If England don't win the World Cup, which they almost certainly won't, I'm a classic, get hopeful and then get them dashed again. Who do I want to win the World Cup? I'd go for a European team. I'd
Okay.
probably go for Spain just because I think they have the best players and I know the most about them. And so therefore I think that's a valid winner. And also my daughter got Spain picked in her sweepstake in her class. So I'll root for her team.
Okay, and now the second part of the question, who do you think will win? Prediction markets, who do you think is going to win the World Cup?
Yeah, I think that's why I think also picking Spain's a pretty,
Spain.
pretty
Okay.
good bet.
Okay,
I think
cool.
Spain have got a very good bet winning the World Cup.
Cool. Thank you very much. David, do you want to introduce the next part or shall we hand over right to
We'll hand over
Hetty?
to Hetty. Hetty, we focus the podcast on a story. What is your story? How would you like to go ahead and share that?
I have a few stories, but don't worry, I'll just pick one. I thought, given the focus and where you were going, David, actually at the beginning of this conversation, and very interestingly so, around this isn't quite your words, but around sort of social norms or conventions, people's definitions, how we accept the world potentially, and how I'm also saying how the world is why so, or how so, or is that true? I've worked in the sphere of leadership all of my career. As it happens, actually, my first boss was a woman. She had some Anna Wintour characteristics, so back in the world of fashion, some things that are
I know you're talking about.
exceptional, but also somewhat exceptionally unusual. But I will be forever grateful, however. But I think it got me onto very early doors. What I will say it left me with, and I think that's also born out of my own childhood and my innate personality. And I do know that because I've undertaken way more psychometric evaluations than the average person by dint of what I do. I'm always looking for root causes. I'm looking for, I don't mean the facts like without the nuance, but I'm looking for the answer. I'm not looking for what other people tell me the answer is. And I'm as interested in potential as I am in proven experience, and trying to answer the question that's being asked of me to its best ability as pertains to a leadership point, not the one potentially that's the most obvious, that David, where you are going, where you think the answer will be when perhaps that actually isn't the right course. So specifically, therefore, actually, my story is about, you mentioned Artemis earlier, and I'll tell you a bit about that because I think hopefully it resonates just along those lines. So as we were coming out of COVID, I went to the first global meeting that Russell Reynolds hosted for its consultants in the whacking heat of Phoenix, Arizona. We were the only people in Phoenix, Arizona at this time. It was the only place that at short notice accommodate quite a few people. And I hooked up with my best friend there, a lady called Margot McShane. She's my best friend in the firm. She's based in San Francisco. We used to sit on the same promotions board for Russell Reynolds together, but we sit in quite different universes sectorally and geographically. So actually, professionally, our paths had never had the opportunity to really entwine aside from the work that we've done internally. We got together and started having this conversation, as we always easily do. And we were reflecting on leadership in the context of COVID. COVID being a time of extreme uncertainty with no roadmap. We all thought that was then going to pass us by and we get back to obviously a world of slightly more normality. And what we've all found is that this perennial, perpetual sort of chaos and confusion, or certainly perpetual change, has stayed with us. However, we didn't know that at that time. But our reflection was, isn't it interesting, less from a business point of view, more from a political perspective, that actually women leaders seem to be showing up a lot more than their male counterparts, seemingly to know how to navigate the unnavigable, and seem to be making some better decisions with very limited information. It got us going on realizing, which surprisingly we hadn't really spotted in each other yet before, our real passion for, by no means remotely to the detriment of anyone else, most of all men, I suppose, in this context, is actually around, but our passion for the support for women leadership, given knowing that it's a relative minority in our space. So I think it gets a bit to what you were saying, David, around we started to talk about this question has been true since time immemorial, which is still today. So I hope by 2040, and I'll tell you what Artemis is going to do about that 2040 question on what will we turn around and say, hey, I can't believe that was true, is that the statistics are stuck, right? If you look at it at the top of the house, 9 times out of 10, when you are either promoting or recruiting in your next chief executive in any that's on an aggregate basis around the world, you're going to promote or recruit a man. Now, that isn't to say that men are bad in the slightest, but it is saying that there's a huge opportunity of underleveraged capability that's sitting on the side that's not being used. Now, we all know that to be true, and lots of people have done lots of very noble and very well-intentioned exercises to try and rebalance that, but not really got anywhere. So for us, we started to think about, given that Russell Reynolds' speciality is understanding the boardroom and CEO progression to succession, surely we should have some answers that are different from other people's, but we had to rethink it. So where you were going, David, on the so what, so why, so what's really the answer? And we actually then stripped it back to the fundamental principles. Fundamental principles being our job for our clients is to answer and give the best possible range and choice of leader that you might require. If you start with those principles, we started to do the research of born on some suppositions, but then borne out by fact that, unsurprisingly, the competencies required to lead in today's perennially changing world are meaningfully different from the ones that used to matter as much. So it's about reframing. I think about it as like reframing a prism. We've been looking through a skewed lens and we need to tip it this way. And you're looking this way, you start to value different competencies, which are actually the ones that actually make the difference versus the ones that you think they are. When we start to do that, we also realize that women have some real ace cards to play in that context without being unduly stereotypical, which also start to play out yet further evidence why it might be a good idea to think about rebalancing that selection slate. I could tell you plenty more, but in summary, we therefore worked really hard on building the insight and the data to challenge those conventions, as Helmut, you were going, bringing the data and insight to show, not because we're saying, oh, you're stupid or our life is hard or poor me, but quite the contrary. But like, hey, we've all been thinking like this. We go like this, the aperture opens like this, and there's so much opportunity for everyone. We've built specifically a CEO accelerator program for women. Well, it's a world first, which is all about optimizing your situation, recognizing the reality of your context health, so it is not naive, but we are giving people the data and the insights and the knowledge and the exposure on the one hand. On the other, we're being really practical around how you turn that into the so what of my context and how I shift my situation. I'm happy to tell you out of that program, we've run 2 cohorts. The first cohort saw 25% of them promoted to CEO or next stop CEO. We are nearly at 40% promotion on the current cohort. Alone, we will shift that 9 out of 10 dial down, we'll drop it down over the next few years without any question. So my story is, I suppose, is that you can, through rigorous analysis, focus on excellence and expertise and getting the right and reframing questions that everyone thought were tired, almost impossible to reconcile, we are opening a whole new window of possibility. And the last thing I'll say is that it's influenced everything we think about executive progression, both the system that you need to deliver this kind of leadership, that's a gender agnostic statement, and how you manage and how you select according to that basis. And in a time where I can tell you that our data has told us that both men and women's interest in becoming the CEO is dropping precipitously quickly. So we've got a time when less people want to lead. It's harder to lead. The competencies are changing. The great news is we have an answer here. We just need to leverage it.
Excellent.
Helmut, any questions for you? What's your reaction?
Yeah, I mean, Hetty, there's one thing you said, and that really resonates with me very much, is that the interest in becoming a CEO is significantly decreasing. Yeah. Now, a story, so I've been, professionally, I was working in HRBP for a long time, and every year when we hired the new graduates, I would normally try to meet them like 6 months in 9 months. And the interesting thing, every guy probably said, what do you want to do in your career? 90% said, I want to be the CEO of this company. I want to run this company. There was no doubt about that. Yeah. On the other hand side, I've never had, with one exception, basically a woman saying they want to do that. What do you make out of that?
That doesn't surprise me. So I suppose couple of reflections on that. One, that's why I think something like Artemis really matters, because you want to see that other people can do it, other women can do it, and you need more visibility of that. I know that's a long way away when you're sitting as the graduate, but at least you know it's increasingly possible and normalized. In fact, interestingly, at our last cohort, we had a woman CEO come and amongst many coming to talk to the group. And one of the group leant forward and said, "You do know you're the reason why I really decided to keep going." Because, and bet it, she is now just been promoted to CEO. She said, "It's people like you," and it was you specifically. But to get back to probably the nub of your question, look, you could have a series of podcasts on, for want of better expression, we could call it social conditioning of some kind, and all of our own societal norms around why girls are. I've had a woman's chief exec that I know very well speak really eloquently on. As a boy, it was like, hey, you go run out and get dirty. Doesn't matter if you fall over, go and try stuff and go and win the race. As a girl, it's like, don't fall over, make sure you look neat and tidy, and sort of sense of more obvious sort of curtailment from the beginning. But if I park all of that, let's assume that there are therefore some sort of societal norms and or lack of role models, all sorts of stuff. What's really interesting, and back on kind of unearthing this huge well of possibility, is that actually if you look at women leaders, exactly, it goes all the way to the top. A third of women CEOs that we've spoken to said they didn't consider being CEO until they were asked. So that goes back onto our point on one of the big gives, right, on creating the kind of culture that creates the right conditions for more people of the right capabilities to rise up, men and women, is assume that you are running, if you were still helmet at BP, your talent program should assume that everyone is in until they officially opt out. And that may sound like semantics, but it's really not. If you're required to raise your hand, you will find more men raising their hands and earlier, typically, and the data will tell you that. So don't make it about that. Make it about assumption that everyone is involved in this selection or whatever, this evaluation and long-term progression system, unless they tell you they don't want to be in it. I'm not saying that solves the root cause, but it would help push things faster forward.
Can I ask another follow-on question? Yeah. And this is, I'm very proud, as an Austrian, I'm very proud to see a female leader running Austria's largest oil company, will be Emma Delaney.
Friend Emma Delaney, an Artemis graduate, no less.
Right. And I think that is really amazing. I'm very proud. And I'm pretty certain that she is going to be the best CEO of this company in a long time. Then actually, I recently watched the BP first quarter results and what I find really interesting, the only people on the results presentation were 3 females.
Yes.
CEO, CFO, and deputy CEO. Do you think this is the world we're going to face in 20, 30 years? And do you think this is going to be a better world? Or do you think it's equally bad as having only guys in the boardroom?
So many lovely things to think about in that, and interesting concepts to think about there, Helmut. I was also thinking when David was projecting to his 2040, so related, I'd love to say that we'd be gender blind at that point. It's frankly is irrelevant. I am a realist, so I think we'll still be on that journey at that time, especially as we know at least the rhetoric has changed around us to a degree where things like the word diversity, things that might be attached to that, are given that label, and that label has got a negative connotation. I, however, think the vast majority, and certainly in the business context, the evidence is so loud that actually looking for a range of capabilities, and that includes, and including gender diversity, not that that's a capability, but recognizing that yields better results. So I think that train will continue to positively go down the tracks. But to your point, well, interestingly, there's a thing called the Hypatia Index in the US, which is, I don't know if you've heard of that, and it is a series of investors who've decided to invest only in companies that have a woman as their CEO. Well, they outperform, and they invest across sectors. It's sector agnostic. They outperform their competitor peers by 25%. So one could say there's an argument certainly for women CEOs having in that context, at least, a superior track record. But of course, I'm not saying that women CEOs are better than men CEOs. 100% not. What I am saying is, if we want to fish from the best pool, you want to have both, and that would be my summary. Because I also think that there's something else that happens potentially if the dynamic is purely female. So the same goes if it's the dynamic is purely male. So I think a combination of the two. And I think what will be really interesting, which we really want to get onto at Russell Reynolds in the next couple of years, is also how do we think about optimizing the relationship between men and women in an executive capacity. And let's get it on the table. There's a whole bunch of conventional societal norms for you guys. And how do we think about that? Even if I do think that the work as pertaining to women leaders is far bigger because the imbalance is currently like this. But I'd still like to work on how we balance those scales and then pull them together.
Excellent. I think that's a very good and interesting piece of work.
I
David,
think
Hetty, how does it feel for you to work on Artemis?
a perennial fuel of motivation and professional fulfillment. I'm not saying I'm done by any means. That's the point. I'm intending for this to my next decade of my professional career to mean a heck of a lot more than the ones I've lived already, and I hopefully haven't been idle until this point. It's thrilling to be able to feel that you're delivering impact, right? The single biggest reason why most people lead, again, our data will tell you, is and in fact women index on this far higher than their male counterparts, is impact, and that is my driver. Positive impact, I might say. And I mean, that's an interesting other correlation, right? One of the leadership competencies that we've identified as really a feature of a progressive CEO who's really making it in today's complicated world is what we call multi-systems thinkers. So ability to look across this plethora of stakeholders now that's coming towards you, and your ability to join the dots and understand the interconnectivity and read the weak signals even if the louder ones are more in your face, and synthesize the noise and work out what matters, which is really hard. But there's a direct correlation between multi-system thinkers and a desire and drive for impact. So again, it's back on one of my ace cards that I'm not saying it's exclusive, but women leaders show a higher preponderance of doing. So for me, I guess I'm classic Artemis woman in that context. I've also learnt myself, right? I've literally sat there drinking some of the advice that's being given, right? So I used to talk, even if Helmut, I am innately a big time optimist and I'm not underconfident, but I will still speak in terms like, I wish, I hope, is that okay? Whilst now for Artemis, it is happening. And that's great. So I'm sort of shifting my slightly cautious language, qualified words into specific action-orientated speech. So yeah, it's. But you know what, David? It's because we haven't even started yet. The program is our crown jewel and our beginning of our drive for impact, and it is becoming the innovation hub for the whole of Russell Reynolds. On the insight and data we're generating is completely getting us to rethink our advice total on how you think about executive progression, development, and succession over time. So that's super cool, but I want its influence to be far wider ranging than that. I may sound like a bit of a megalomaniac, I realize when I say that, and I quite like going, I'm just here to change the world when I get introduced to a CEO and they're like, uh-oh. But actually there's a reason why I say it tongue in cheek, but I'm not entirely without serious intent.
In some ways, I was trying to bridge into that, not megalomaniac necessarily, but the badges we wear, the labels we wear. There was a time that I would have described myself as a management consultant. There was a time that I would have described myself as a HR something, leader, manager. And then about 10 years ago, I stopped both of those descriptions or labels in favor of something else. I just wonder whether or not over the space of the last few years, Hetty, you would recognize or reflect on whether or not you would describe some change of description or label from headhunter, search, leadership consultant to some leading a movement, perhaps, or is that too much of a stretch?
So you've picked the right word. Yeah, it is a movement. 100%. Our intention is for the amplifier effect of what we're learning, what we can show, what we can evidence, how we can touch people, has got its permeation. It's to permeate, society. I mean, that does sound quite grand, but certainly let's talk about it in a business context, at least potentially also in a world where the political environment is pretty febrile. So if we're looking for some central ground that people might be interested in occupying rather than just going like that, business has also, I think, a responsibility to occupy and be able to balance the scales. So if we're thinking about business leadership and its responsibility and the vacuum that's perhaps left behind, I think that I think that being able to use Artemis and its movement qualities to be able to help that middle furrow with different insights, different opportunities, better quality people, not better quality people, but qualified people and developed people, I think is only to the good. So no doubt, the only thing I have caught myself on, so I'm definitely yeah, I guess a leader of my own, with my own band of happy followers together. We're all united, and this is not just me, but I'm one of a movement within Artemis, and we intend to multiply it significantly. But I was conscious that initially, particularly the amount, I must say, of effort it took to get it to start going, that I was really conscious that I was probably painting myself into a corner of being seen as a sort of feminist firebrand, and I don't mind that. But it's a bit irritating because there's quite a lot more I can give. And also, you might not listen to me if that's how you think about me. You might just reject me or refute or something because you just assume back on the labels that it's stuck on your head. So for me, I have gone back to my first principles of why we started Artemis, which is actually really helpful, which is genuinely as simple as stated. I'm really interested in improving the way the world is led. That is Russell Reynolds' strapline. I truly believe it. And that's what I am about. But the influence that I want to have now, yes, indeed, is of across that leadership spectrum. And in fact, I spend, from a professional point of view, less time finding people these days as a headhunter would do, or much more about the people that already work in your organization and how can we optimize their capabilities and their future in service of delivering your strategies. Yeah, my label has changed. And I've actually done some work on myself, I would say, last year as well, right? You may not believe it on this podcast, but I am quite unrelenting, which was one of the words that Helmut used. I was like, oh no, could you use something a bit, one of my colleagues said, you're very tough-minded. And I was like, that's horrible. That means I'm stubborn. He's one of my Artemis crew. And he went, no, but you've got the biggest heart. And I was like, and he said, the best leaders. I was like, thanks, dude, for saying that. But what I mean is, I think I have more range. And I've been thinking about that around, if I'm not careful, my brand is, she's at you. There's a lot of volume, there's a lot of energy, which I do have. But where's her range and her sophistication if I'm not careful that actually I can understand things across quite a broad spectrum? And I have been working hard on that. So you don't assume that I'm the stereotype that you might imagine me to be.
Yeah. Can I just finish off on one thought? There is a revolution taking place in artificial intelligence and in automation that removes the enclaves of careers that were focused on tasks and focused on delivering products to some very large extent. And so I think that the real nugget here, there are many takeaways, but the real nugget here is that very human, empathetic, intuitive sense of a cause, a purpose, something that needs to be confronted and corrected, which I don't think is a domain of AI. It's something that sits outside that. And in a way, it's a great illustration of the distinction between sitting in a managerial job, pushing paper or a task, and being vulnerable to the inevitable automation that's on its way, versus fighting for something that has meaning, that is truly human. And all of the other stuff is in service of trying to make that better. I do Helmut as a punctuation of some of the stuff we've been working on around careers and how to make yourself more AI resilient. I think there's something in that. There's something in the sense of fighting for that's bigger than yourself. It's bigger than a salary or a job or a bonus. What do you think?
100%. Interestingly, I was actually I was in the inverse role last week with someone that Helmut and I both work with, a guy that is now currently the CEO of De Beers. And he was asked a sort of related question on AI and also specifically for him, that industry is seriously under threat from its artificial competitor. And he, unsurprisingly, had an excellent, he had an excellent answer, which I think is a reasonably good proxy for everything you've just said. He said, in a land of what we're heading into, there'll be no substitute for scarcity, specialness, and authentication is actually what he said, not authenticity. But I think that's super interesting, and I think it's a really good proxy. And if we go on where also the actions that we know around, it translates directly into the CEO and broader leadership competencies that are the ones that are now going to matter. In today's world, where you're looking to answer a moving target of where your business is going to be, and no one knows where that target is going to land, in the timescale that you've got to end up potentially being selected to lead it, you necessarily can't be assessed in the same way against the CV, resume, whatever you want to call it, and experience. So it's sort of related. You can't tick the boxes of the task delivered in the same way. It's useful, and it's a useful test, but it's not going to be the answer in your predictor in the same way of likelihood of the person being able to do it. So my refute to AI on that is, what are the things that are mattering? It's intellectual curiosity, creativity, self-awareness, amongst and that multi-systems thinking that I talked about. Those aspects which are you can't get those from technology, and they are going to win out on making the difference of the person who's going to lead most effectively.
Helmut, anything to add?
Basically, Hetty, one question I'm really interested, because I do see a trend that large corporations find it harder and harder to attract the best people, yet they still do the same over and over again. Public school educated, Oxford or Cambridge, in the US is probably MIT, Harvard, Ivy League. Will that produce the right results for exactly the reason you just mentioned? You need curiosity, you need original thinking, you need to broaden your horizon, your spectrum as a leader. Or do you see a trend in corporations figuring different ways of resourcing into their organizations?
It's slow, I'd say. It's coming. It's coming. I totally agree with your point around this sort of almost ever narrowing perspective to a degree. I mean, certainly not expanding, as I would say, over my career. I wouldn't say around how people have thought about graduate intakes, and especially in certain domains like the world of private equity, for example. Quite remarkable how narrow they are with regards to the pool within which they fish. Now, that's in part because they like to know that people are in the network. That's the network that will access the businesses they want to know about. That is definitively one of their reasons. But I think it's coming, Helmut, because it's inevitable. Because this tidal wave of AI that's coming, has already come and going to wash over us a lot more. As David, you were suggesting and implying, that's first of all, obviously we all know major implications for your talent feeder population, and in fact, A, how many you want, and B, what you're going to do with them. So I think it's very quickly going to insist upon some of those characteristics that you've just referred to, Helmut, being prioritized, because they're the things that those are the things that you can rely on. Experience, background is not going to be your determining factor. So I actually think, if I go back to David, what you said at the beginning of this conversation, if you go to your 2040 point, I probably have more faith that will happen, Helmut, by 2040 than we'll have parity in men and women chief executives.
So is that part of the podcast? We find very often with these podcasts that we could go on forever. And while we might be interested in that, we're conscious that our audience may not. Helmut, can I ask you to bring this section to an end with your
very, very happy, David. Hetty, at every podcast with a question is really one advisor. In your instance, I would ask you, what is the one advice you would give to a young woman in her 20s? One career advice.
So you ask career woman.
I would normally it's like in general, but it just
So I'd say in general, consider at least your 20s is your period of maximum experimentation. So forget what your parents might say, having lived a more conventional, big chunks of your career in certain sections of sectors or companies. I think you can feel very relaxed about that. And I think, having actually boosting your creativity, the expansion of your knowledge and your exposure is only a good thing. So I would not, if you don't find your path first, second, third, or fourth time, I think that's actually could be an opportunity for you. I wouldn't worry about it. I'd embrace it and see it as a good thing. So I'd say that gender agnostic. And as a woman, I'd just encourage you to question yourself when you question yourself, if that makes sense. As in, when you're asking, is that possible? Could I do this? Really? Is it me? Make an assumption that if someone's asking you, inviting you into an opportunity, or they think it's valid that you're having a conversation about a role, assume there's a very valid reason why you're there and don't question it. Just go forward with purpose. Quieten the inner monologue that might be questioning your validity.
Excellent. So you're basically saying if a door opens, walk through it.
Yeah. And we do know that women tend to question themselves harder than men on their readiness for roles. So if you think readiness is your worry, scrap that from your mind.
Okay, thank you. Excellent.
Hetty, how do people find out about Artemis if they're interested? What can they do?
Well, by dint of wanting to get it out there, my LinkedIn profile has got plenty of information. A lot of some of the data I've been talking about, there's much more and other things besides. And there's only one Hetty Pye because literally no one else has such a ridiculous name in the world. So you can find me super quick. So I'd look on there if you're looking to sort of read around the subject with pleasure. You can also go straight onto our website if you like. So there's an RA Artemis section within Russell Reynolds. There's more stuff attached there, but I'd actually probably go to my LinkedIn site first because it's super quick and you'll find everything on there.
And while Helmut didn't ask this question, I know that you want to share it. Of all the HR directors in the world that you've ever worked with, do you have a favorite? Is there one that stands out for good or bad reasons?
My God.
Well, you made Helmut blush, so that's very good. What I will tell you is this is a good and honest answer. The only HR director that I have worked with and don't anymore that's become a real friend is Helmut.
Ah, okay. Well, there you go. That deserves some acknowledgement, Helmut. Well, thank you for that, Hetty. It was a diplomatic answer and one that seemed to serve Helmut's. We bring our podcast to the end by encouraging people to catch up with our library of podcasts. If you've enjoyed this one, I'm sure you'll enjoy the other 27 that are out there. We are very keen to try and make sure that you understand our service, and our mission here is to try and help people have more successful careers, more fulfilling careers. There's a bridge to what Hetty was saying about COVID and about the Great Resignation and about the subsequent concepts of bore out and quiet quitting and the pandemic of disillusionment with modern work, perhaps also playing into the whole AI business. So what we have set ourselves out to do is to try and find solutions, to try and be constructive, to try and help generations find their way in the workplace. So there's a bunch of stuff that we've done in that regard. And we've written 3 books. We've got the podcast series, we've got the LinkedIn content and the various things that we share on social media. So we would encourage you. Today, actually, our newsletter just went out. The 5 alternatives to joining the long list of resumes that are queuing up for the big graduate programs. We share those today and expose those alternative paths that are very untrodden by comparison. Sign up if you haven't already. I was trying to think, what else do we normally share at the end of the podcast? What have I missed out on, Helmut? Read books.
I think we're fine. Read books, have
Sign
fun,
up for
enjoy life,
have
and
fun.
use
Enjoy
sunscreen.
life.
Use sunscreen. That's
Eat
very
raspberries.
important. Yep.
Particularly black raspberries, apparently.
Drink water.
Yes.
Drink water. Wear sunscreen, drink water, take exercise, 30 minutes. Okay, with all of that, Helmut, final word.
No, it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure having you, Hetty. It's always a delight. Insightful, so thank you very much for that.
It's been real fun. Thank you too.
Hetty, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And for this episode of Dr. Schuster and Oxley, we will say goodbye.